While Washington has pulled back on electric vehicle mandates and emissions enforcement, California is moving in the opposite direction. No surprise. And the nation's largest automakers are paying very close attention. This week, executives from the Detroit 3 are sitting down with regulators from the California Air Resources Board, known as CARB, and they're reopening a conversation that has become increasingly consequential for the future of the U.S. auto industry and your vehicle choices. The meetings come at a pivotal moment. Congress has revoked California's longstanding authority to set its own vehicle emission standards. Federal fuel economy rules have been weakened, and financial penalties for missing emissions targets have been eliminated. Yet, California is signaling it has no intention of slowing its pursuit of zero-emissions transportation, in other words, all EVs. Instead, the state is preparing to launch a $200 million electric vehicle incentive program designed to offset the loss of the federal $7,500 EV tax credit that ended in September of last year to keep pressure on automakers to electrify their fleets, even though they're taking a loss on every single vehicle. For Detroit automakers, the calculations are very complex. Federal relief has eased near-term compliance costs, but California remains the largest single automotive market in the country and a regulatory bellwether for more than a dozen other states. Ignoring Sacramento has never been a viable long-term strategy, regardless of which party controls Washington. And the California Air Resources Board Chair Lauren Sanchez made that clear in a recent interview, stating that the state is accelerating its work on zero-emissions vehicles while attempting to manage what she describes as a transition that accounts for environmental goals, workforce stability, and industry realities. That balance, however, is increasingly difficult as political and legal battles reshape the regulatory landscape. In other words, if they don't comply, you can't sell cars in California. California's authority to lead on emissions policy dates back decades. The Federal Clean Air Act of 1970 granted the state unique permission to seek waivers from the Environmental Protection Agency, or the EPA, allowing it to impose stricter emissions rules on the federal government. Other states then permitted to adopt California standards instead of federal ones, given the state outsized influence over national vehicle design and production. So New York, New Jersey, and so forth, the typical states you'd expect, they followed California's rule. Now, that authority has now been curtailed using the Congressional Review Act, or the CRA, and we've covered that on our channel. Lawmakers rescinded California's Advanced Clean Car 2 waiver, which would have required a phase-out of new gasoline-powered vehicles by 2035. That's gone. And Congress also revoked waivers governing zero-emissions heavy-duty trucks and stricter nitrogen oxide limits on diesel engines, and we've covered that as well. But at the same time, the administration moved to halt the collection of penalties for automakers that failed to meet federal tailpipe standards. In other words, if you owed us money, don't worry about it. Take that money and put it back into building cars that people want and profits so you can build your company and jobs. That's what that's all about. But for automakers, the immediate financial implications are significant. General Motors has said the rollback of federal emissions rules could save the company as much as $750 million. Those savings matter in an industry faced with high interest rates, slowing EV demand, rising production costs, and of course the cost of vehicles have gotten more expensive and people are buying less electric vehicles. Yet, California officials argue that a short-term relief may come at a long-term cost. And of course, they don't care if the car makers make money or not, or whether it impacts jobs. It's all about California. Very self-centered. State regulators contend that weakening U.S. emissions and efficiency standards risks surrendering technological leadership to global competitors, particularly China, even though they're having trouble with their electric vehicles as well. China has aggressively supported electric vehicle manufacturing and battery development through government policy and subsidies because they supply all the batteries, so of course they're going to want to push that. From California's perspective, the new $200 million EV incentive program is intended to bridge a growing gap. With the federal tax credit gone, EVs remain more expensive than comparable gasoline vehicle models, and that's what consumers are deciding. They want gas or hybrid. And state incentives are meant to keep demand from stalling further while encouraging manufacturers to continue investing in electrification rather than retreating from it altogether, which some brands have. Automakers, however, are navigating a market that no longer aligns neatly with policy ambitions. Consumer interest in electric vehicles has cooled compared to earlier projections. Of course, those were just projections, not reality, and the charging infrastructure remains uneven, to put it nicely. And concerns about affordability and resale value persist because electric vehicles have horrible resale value. Manufacturers are now adjusting production plans, delaying some EV launches, and re-emphasizing hybrids and internal combustion vehicles that meet current demand. And that's what people want. That disconnect has fueled tensions between California leaders and the auto industry. Governor Gavin Newsom sharply criticized GM last year after the company supported federal efforts to roll back California's authority, accusing the automaker of undermining years of emissions progress. GM responded by emphasizing California's importance as a market and reaffirming its commitment to dialogue with regulators, even as it welcomed regulatory relief on a federal level, because it's about profits. That's why. The legal fight is far from over. California officials expect to challenge the anticipated efforts to rescind EPA's endangerment finding. The determination that greenhouse gases pose a threat to public health, well, that's definitely in question, and the science may not be solid. And the findings underpin much of the federal government's authority to regulate vehicle emissions, not one state. And if repealed, it would represent one of the most significant shifts in the environmental policy in decades and would almost certainly trigger prolonged court battles, which California most likely will lose. In anticipation of more federal government regulations, California regulators have already pulled back some proposals. Prior to the current administration taking office, the state withdrew waiver requests that would have imposed the nation's strictest locomotive pollution rules and forced timelines for replacing diesel trucks with zero-emission alternatives, which would mean everything would get more expensive to deliver to your home and wherever you buy things, and that includes Amazon. State officials describe those moves as strategic, preserving flexibility while exploring other regulatory and incentive-based approaches. Or is it Gavin Newsom lining himself up for a next presidential run? We shall see. For automakers, the lesson is familiar. Regulatory swings are inevitable, but market access is permanent. California's economy rivals that of entire nations, and its policies continue to influence vehicle standards well beyond its borders. Even without a formal waiver authority, the state retains powerful tools through incentives, procurement policies, and partnerships that can shape product planning and investment decisions from car brands. And the Detroit Three's willingness to stay engaged reflects a recognition that today's rollback may not be tomorrow's reality. Political power shifts, court decisions evolve, and regulatory frameworks are rarely static. And maintaining open lines of communication with California regulators is less about immediate concessions and more about long-term positioning in an industry where product cycles span decades and their sales are way off. The broader question is whether the policy can realistically move faster than consumers. Consumers aren't buying EVs, and their manufacturers are making them. And mandates and incentives can steer development, but they cannot force you to purchase an electric vehicle. That cannot force you to adapt to those vehicles. And it's really about affordability, infrastructure, and the trust that lags behind. California's renewed push underscores a fundamental tension in the EV transition. It's not going to happen. It will still be part of the mix. And the difference between regulatory ambition and market readiness is a big issue. As federal and state governments continue to be on separate sides, automakers are left to bridge the gap. The meetings in Detroit this week may not resolve the tension, but they highlight an undeniable truth. Regardless of political shifts in Washington and California today or in the future, they intend to be the central player in shaping the future of transportation, and the auto industry cannot afford to look away, but you get to make the decision. So even though it's not constitutional, it's time to stop allowing one state to make the rules for the other 49. You make the decision. Car manufacturers will make what you want to buy. If they make what you don't want to buy, they're going to be stuck with a heck of a lot of cars. If you like this video, give it a like and subscribe for more videos like this, and check out our car review channel, Car Smarts. You can support me by buying me a cup of coffee, and if you want even more content, check out the links in the description. I'm Lauren Fix. Thank you so much for watching.